Hey, and welcome to part two of this 5-part mini course. Today, we're going to be talking all about stomach acid and digestion. So last time in part one, we talked about the entire digestive system from mouth all the way down, the different parts of our digestive system and how they're supposed to function when they work the way they're supposed to work. Now, today, we're going to narrow in on part of our digestive system that doesn't get a lot of attention, but is foundational to everything else, and that is stomach acid. So let's start with recapping what is the actual role of stomach acid and why do we need it? Because it has three main roles, okay? First one is going to be protection. So stomach acid is going to decrease the pH of your stomach, which increases the acidity of it. And that acidic nature actually acts as a protective barrier against pathogens and bacteria that we consume, right? So when we eat food or ingest anything, like most things are like not 100% clean. And so we need a protective measure against the things that have contaminated those. And so stomach acid is a line of defense against those ingested bacteria and pathogens that come in contact with food or different things that we consume. A second thing that stomach acid does is it activates pepsin. So here's the deal. We talked about pepsin last time. So pepsin is actually an enzyme that breaks down proteins. But in order for it to do what it's supposed to do, it needs to be what's called activated or like turned on. So the way that that happens is acid is actually going to activate or turn on this enzyme so that it can function the way that it's intended to function, which means break down proteins. So if our stomach acid is low, then it can actually decrease the ability to turn on pepsin, and therefore it can inhibit the breakdown of proteins or the digestion of proteins, right? And then the third thing that stomach acid does is it actually acts as a signal downstream. So here's what I mean is that when we eat food and it breaks down in our stomach, we start that digestive process. That acidic mixture that goes into our small intestine actually sends a signal to our pancreas and our gallbladder to release what they're intended to release. Our pancreas is going to release pancreatic juice, which has different enzymes. Gallbladder will release bile, which will start to break down different parts of that mixture. Now, if the acidic nature of that mixture that comes from our stomach into our small intestine because of low stomach acid is not acidic enough, those signals aren't sent properly to the pancreas and the gallbladder, and therefore it can inhibit the further breakdown of those nutrients, because those signals that are intended to like communicate with different parts to say like, hey, send back these digestive enzymes and digestive and bile and digestive juices and stuff like that, those signals aren't communicated, and therefore it can impact the digestion of that mixture kind of going down. So those are three main roles of stomach acid. So you can see that like if stomach acid is impacted, it doesn't just stay in the stomach and actually affects a lot more of our digestive system as a result of it. So what actually disrupts stomach acid then in the first place? Like how can it get messed up? So let's talk about it. First one is going to be environmental. So we interact with toxins on a daily basis in our environment. And so when those are impacted, then it can inhibit our stomach acid production. Another thing is going to be stress. So here we go. We have our sympathetic nervous system, and then we have our parasympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight mode. So when we are constantly stressed, we're in this high alert fight or flight mode constantly. All right. Optimal digestion happens when we're able to get to the parasympathetic state at certain times, right? Parasympathetic state is going to be our rest and digest. If we are unable to get to the parasympathetic state and we remain in the sympathetic fight or flight mode, that can actually inhibit our stomach acid production and therefore inhibit or disrupt our digestive capacity. Another thing is going to be infections. So things like H. pylori can actually affect our stomach acid production, which ironically, low stomach acid can actually increase the growth of H. pylori. And therefore you get this like crazy cycle with that infection, which is not good. Diet is another thing that can affect our stomach acid production. Like most things that like diet's going to affect all parts of our digestive system, because that's the mode when we eat food, like it travels down the tube. So it's going to affect different parts of it. And then hydration. So when it comes to hydration, one of the things we have to think about specifically with stomach acid is a liquid. Therefore, if hydration is going to impact its production, hydration or lack thereof can impact our stomach acid production. So those are things that can disrupt it. Another thing that deserves a little bit more attention is going to be our acid suppressing medications. So things like PPIs, like omeprazole, H2 blockers, over-the-counter antacids. Now, these are some of the most commonly prescribed. Like people take antacids all the time. And one of the things you have to think about is like a lot of times we take it because of reflux, but you really need to hear this, is that these medications like work by suppressing acid. And a lot of times when you have reflux, it's caused by low acid. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So if low acid is causing reflux and then we're taking things that are going to suppress acid production, it's actually going to make it worse because it's going to decrease stomach acid even further. So a lot of times you can talk to people who like go on these medications and they just have to take them constantly, up their doses and their dosages, and they're actually not getting any better. And it can be because the problem actually started with low stomach acid in the first place, and now you're suppressing it even more. Some other disruptors of stomach acid production are age. So unfortunately, as we age, like that's one thing that actually starts to decline. Another thing can be zinc deficiency. So lack of adequate amounts of zinc can actually lead to decreased stomach acid, but we also need stomach acid in order to aid in our absorption of zinc. So it becomes this perpetual cycle, not enough zinc, lower stomach acid, and then it keeps going. Another thing is going to be like eating too fast, not chewing enough, and eating under stress. Again, this can lead to us staying in a sympathetic state versus being able to like get our body into a parasympathetic state, and therefore can affect our stomach acid production by doing these behaviors of eating too fast, not chewing enough, and staying under stress. So if those are the things that disrupt it, and the next question is like, okay, so like what happens then when our stomach acid is off? Like what happens if it does go down, right? Then what? And so here's some things that happen, right? One of them, increased infection. So I talked about H. pylori. So when stomach acid goes down, increase infection because we're missing that protective barrier, since protection is one of the roles. So if infections go up, so H. pylori is one example. Yeast, like Candida, is another one that we see often in the digestive tract. These things can actually increase in their growth or abundance and thrive more easily because there's not enough acid essentially that's killing them, and therefore they just continue to grow, right? So you get increased infections. That's one thing. Another thing that can happen when we have lower stomach acid is going to be dysbiosis. So how this works, dysbiosis, or like bacterial, like the wrong bacteria amounts of growth. Again, we need bacteria, but if it's growing in the wrong place or in the wrong amount, then the ratio is off, and that creates issues. So what happens here is we have undigested food because of low stomach acid. We're not digesting food. The food doesn't get digested or broken down as much. And therefore, as it travels to different parts of our digestive system, it actually can carry bacteria with it further along the pathway than it typically would have. And that can spread different types of bacteria and allow for flourishing in different parts where it wasn't intended to be. And then another one is going to be decreased nutrient absorption. So specifically things like B12, iron, calcium, protein, these things can actually decrease in their absorption capacity because there's not enough stomach acid that's required in part of their digestion or their breakdown. Therefore, we can't absorb them because they aren't broken down, or they haven't gotten to a state that we can actually absorb them well. So those are some things that can happen. And I think a lot of times, like the way my mind works is that like, okay, I hear these, but then I'm like, well, what's the step-by-step that actually happens? So let's talk about the mechanism. The mechanism meaning what's the step-by-step process that happens? So for example, we have low stomach acid. Then pepsin does not get activated. And because pepsin doesn't get activated properly, then our protein digestion is going to stall, right? Or be impacted. Another one is like, okay, so we have low stomach acid. When that food travels down to the small intestine, like those signals are not actually sent to the pancreas and the gallbladder as effectively. And therefore digestive enzymes and adequate amounts of bile aren't actually released properly. Therefore, food isn't broken down the way it's supposed to be broken down at the beginning part of our intestines. So those are some of the mechanisms of what happen when we don't have enough stomach acid. All right. So, okay. We don't have enough stomach acid. So then like, what are the signs? Like, how do I know? Like what are the signs that that's going to happen? Great question. Let's get into it. So first one's going to be reflux. So I've talked about this before briefly. So let's get into it. So when it comes to reflux, typically, so it's called like the reflux paradox, because typically when we have reflux, it's actually a result of low stomach acid and not high stomach acid. So you would think, hey, look, I have too much stomach acid, it's coming back up. That's actually not what's happening. So here's what's actually happening is you have low stomach acid, which is going to lead food to ferment a little bit longer. And in the fermentation process, you're actually releasing gases. So gases of that longer fermentation process of sitting in your stomach, right, is going to increase the pressure within your stomach, and it's going to put pressure on that esophageal sphincter. Now, that esophageal sphincter is that muscle at the top of your stomach, bottom of your esophagus, right? That should be this like circle that's like clasped. Once food goes into your stomach, it like tightens up and closes. But if you have all this pressure, it starts pushing on that muscle and eventually it starts to relax. And because of all that pressure, it relaxes. And when it does, a little bit of acid is able to creep back up that esophagus. So you feel that burning and you get that reflux. And the first thought is, I have too much acid. Well, really, you had too little acid and your digestive capacity was decreased. And that's why you're actually feeling that reflux. So reflux is one sign that you may have low stomach acid. Some other signs that you might have low stomach acid are going to be like bloating, specifically especially after specific foods. If you're like burping or belching like right after meals, feeling overly full really quickly. If you have undigested food in your stool is another one, or if you have brittle nails or hair, that can be signs of like iron deficiency or different types of nutrient deficiency that can be related to low stomach acid. So, okay, we talked about this vicious cycle. Let's get into it one more time just to kind of like talk about what actually happens. So you have low stomach acid and it can lead to overgrowth, right? And this typically, if we're talking about like different types of like infections, like bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, right? Combined with that extra food that's like sitting there that can lead to like reflux as well. It's going to lead to irritation of that stomach lining, right? Which then is going to further suppress the acid production because there's irritation. So then it's going to cause an inflammatory response so that you actually decrease the production, and that's going to lead to more suppression of your acid production. And this vicious cycle just continues on and on until something actually interrupts it. So that's why like the whole, hey, just take an antacid if you have reflux isn't necessarily a solution, and that's not like a long-term fix, because that's just treating a symptom, but not really addressing the underlying cycle that could be like the low acid in the first place. And that way you're actually perpetuating this cycle or this like problem to continue over and over again. So with that, a question can always come of like, okay, so we're talking about all this undigested food, then like, where does all this undigested food go? And like, what happens with it next? And typically that leads to dysbiosis. And that's what we plan to talk about in the next session, in session number 3. So hope to see you there.